The red warning lights flashed across Ben's control panel as his small salvage ship spun out of control. He gripped the steering controls tight and tried to steady the vessel, but the electromagnetic storm was too strong. Lightning crackled around his ship like angry fingers, and the engines made terrible grinding sounds. "Come on, hold together," Ben said through gritted teeth as he fought to keep the ship level. But it was no use. The ship crashed into the sandy surface of planet Keth 7 with a loud bang that rang through his bones. When Ben opened his eyes, sand was blowing through a crack in his windscreen. His head hurt badly, and he could taste blood in his mouth. He checked his instruments. The ship was completely dead. The storm had fried every electronic system he had. Ben climbed out of his damaged ship and looked around. Red sand stretched in every direction under two blazing suns. The air was so hot it burned his lungs when he breathed. This was not good. Keth 7 was known as one of the most dangerous desert worlds in this sector of space. He had come here following a distress signal, hoping to find valuable salvage from a crashed ship. Now he was the one who needed rescuing. Ben checked his water supply. He had enough for maybe 3 days if he was careful. As he gathered his emergency supplies, he heard a strange sound carried on the wind. It sounded like metal scraping against rock. Ben climbed to the top of a nearby sand dune and looked around. There, about half a mile away, he could see the twisted wreckage of another ship poking out of the sand. The ship was huge and made of some kind of silver metal that gleamed even under the harsh light. It was clearly not human-made. The design was too elegant, with flowing curves and strange symbols carved into its hull. This had to be the source of the distress signal he had been tracking. Ben made his way carefully toward the wreck, his boots sinking deep into the hot sand with each step. The heat was already making him sweat heavily, and he had to stop several times to rest in what little shade he could find. When he reached the alien vessel, Ben was amazed by its size. It was easily 10 times larger than his own ship, but most of it was buried under tons of sand. Only the top section was visible, with what looked like an emergency hatch that had been blown open from the inside. Ben peered through the opening and called out, "Hello? Anyone alive in there?" At first, there was only silence. Then he heard a weak moan coming from deep inside the ship. Someone was definitely alive down there. Ben squeezed through the hatch and dropped into the dark interior. The inside of the ship was like nothing Ben had ever seen. The walls seemed to glow with a soft blue light, and the corridors were wide enough for giants to walk through. Strange writing covered every surface, and the air smelled like flowers and metal mixed together. Ben followed the sound of the moaning voice deeper into the ship. He passed through several large chambers filled with broken equipment and scattered belongings. Finally, he found the source of the voice in what appeared to be a medical bay. A figure lay on a raised platform in the center of the room, connected to various machines by thin tubes and wires. Ben approached carefully and gasped when he saw who it was. The being on the platform was clearly female, but she was unlike any alien Ben had ever encountered. She stood nearly 8 feet tall, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the light. Her face was beautiful but alien, with large silver eyes and high cheekbones. She wore elaborate robes made of some kind of flowing fabric that changed color when she moved. Most importantly, she wore a crown. It was made of the same silver metal as the ship, with crystals that pulsed with soft light. This was no ordinary alien. This was royalty. The alien queen was badly injured. Ben could see burns along her arms and a deep cut on her forehead that was bleeding strange purple blood. The machines around her were beeping frantically, and several of them were sparking and smoking. As Ben watched, the queen's eyes fluttered open. She looked at him with confusion and said something in a language he could not understand. Her voice was musical but weak. "It's okay," Ben said softly, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm here to help." The queen tried to sit up but collapsed back onto the platform with a cry of pain. Ben could see that her left leg was bent at a wrong angle. It was definitely broken, maybe in more than one place. Ben examined the medical equipment around the Queen. He could not read the alien writing, but the flashing red lights and alarm sounds told him everything he needed to know. The life support systems were failing. Without these machines, the Queen would die within hours. Ben checked his communication device, hoping to call for help, but it was completely dead. The electromagnetic storm had destroyed all electronic equipment for miles around. He was on his own. Ben looked at the injured Queen and made a quick calculation in his head. The nearest human outpost was about 90 miles to the north. In this heat, with no transportation, it would take at least 4 or 5 days to reach safety on foot. And that was just for him alone. The Queen was much larger and heavier than any human. Ben guessed she weighed at least 300 pounds. Carrying her across 90 miles of burning desert should have been impossible. Any reasonable person would have waited for rescue or tried to repair one of the ships. But Ben was not the kind of person to leave someone to die, even an alien someone. He had spent his whole life rescuing valuable items from wrecked ships. Now he had found the most valuable thing of all, a living person who needed his help. Ben gathered medical supplies from around the ship and did his best to treat the Queen's wounds. He used his own first aid kit to stop the bleeding and wrapped her broken leg with strips torn from his shirt. The Queen watched him work, sometimes speaking softly in her own language. Though he could not understand her words, Ben could hear gratitude in her voice. Next, Ben searched the ship for anything that might help with their journey. He found several containers of strange alien food that tasted like sweet fruit. He also discovered a large piece of flexible metal that he could use to build a stretcher. Working quickly as the desert heat grew stronger, Ben constructed a makeshift carrier using the metal sheet and some cable he found in the ship's storage areas. It would not be comfortable, but it would allow him to drag the Queen across the sand instead of trying to carry her. Ben carefully moved the Queen onto his improvised stretcher. She was even heavier than he had thought, but the device worked well enough. He could pull it across flat ground without too much effort. Before leaving the ship, Ben filled every container he could find with water from the ship's emergency supplies. He had enough for maybe 5 days if he was very careful with rationing. It would have to be enough. The two suns were reaching their highest point in the sky when Ben began his journey. The temperature was already over 120 degrees, and it would only get hotter. Ben knew that traveling during the day in this heat would be suicide. He would have to wait until evening and travel at night. Ben found a small piece of shade beside the wrecked ship and settled down to wait. The Queen drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes mumbling in her own language. Ben gave her small sips of water and tried to keep her as comfortable as possible. As the suns began to set, the temperature dropped to a merely unbearable level. Ben checked his compass and started walking north, pulling the stretcher behind him. The sand was still hot enough to burn through his boots, but at least he could breathe without feeling like his lungs were on fire. The first night was the hardest. Ben had never experienced heat like this before. Even after sunset, the temperature stayed above 90 degrees. The sand got into everything, his eyes, his mouth, his clothes. Every step was a struggle as his boots sank deep into the soft ground. The Queen was awake for most of the first night, watching Ben as he pulled her across the endless dunes. Sometimes she would try to help by using her good arm to push against the ground, but she was too weak to make much difference. When the first sun began to rise, Ben found a large rock formation that would provide some shade during the day. He was already exhausted, and they had only covered about 8 miles. At this rate, the journey would take much longer than 5 days. Ben shared some of the alien food with the Queen and gave them both water. He tried to sleep during the hottest part of the day, but the heat made it almost impossible. The Queen seemed better at handling the temperature, but her injuries were clearly causing her pain. On the second night, Ben's water supply was already running dangerously low. He had been giving the Queen larger portions because of her size, but that meant he was becoming dehydrated faster than planned. His head was starting to pound, and he felt dizzy when he stood up. Still, Ben kept walking. Step after step, hour after hour, he dragged the stretcher across the burning sand. His hands were covered in blisters from gripping the cables, and his shoulders ached from the constant strain. The Queen tried to communicate with him throughout the night, pointing at the stars and speaking in her musical language. Ben thought she might be trying to tell him about her home or her people, but he could only guess at her meaning. On the third day, disaster struck. A sandstorm appeared on the horizon like a wall of red dust moving toward them. Ben had nowhere to hide in the open desert. All he could do was lie on top of the Queen to shield her from the worst of the wind and sand. The storm lasted for 6 hours. Ben could not see anything beyond his own hands as the wind howled around them. Sand filled his nose and mouth, making it hard to breathe. The Queen held on to him with her good arm, and Ben could feel her trembling with fear. When the storm finally passed, Ben and the Queen were both buried under several inches of sand. Ben dug them out as quickly as he could, checking to make sure the Queen was still breathing. She was unconscious but alive. Ben's water supply was now critically low. The storm had damaged one of his containers, and precious liquid had leaked out into the sand. He calculated that he had maybe one more day of water left, 2 if he stopped drinking completely. The third night was a nightmare of exhaustion and dehydration. Ben's vision was starting to blur, and he stumbled frequently. Several times he fell completely, dragging the Queen down with him. Each time, it became harder to get back up. The Queen was now unconscious most of the time, only waking occasionally to mumble weakly in her own language. Ben was not even sure she would survive much longer without proper medical care. On the 4th night, Ben began to see things that were not there. Mirages of water and green trees appeared in the distance, only to vanish when he got closer. His mouth was so dry that his tongue felt like leather, and his head pounded with every heartbeat. But Ben kept walking. He had come too far to give up now. The Queen was depending on him, and he would not let her down. Even when his legs felt like they were made of stone, even when every breath burned his throat, he kept putting one foot in front of the other. Near dawn on the 5th day, Ben collapsed. He simply could not take another step. His body had reached its absolute limit. He lay in the sand next to the Queen's stretcher, gasping for air that felt like fire in his lungs. The Queen opened her silver eyes and looked at him. She said something in her language, and though Ben could not understand the words, he could hear the sadness in her voice. She knew they were both about to die in this endless desert. Ben closed his eyes and tried to find the strength to continue. He thought about his family back on Earth, about all the people who were depending on him to succeed. He could not give up now. Not when they had come so far. With a tremendous effort, Ben forced himself to stand up. His legs shook like leaves in the wind, but they held his weight. He grabbed the cables of the stretcher and began walking again. Just as the sun was reaching its highest point, Ben saw something impossible on the horizon. Buildings. Real buildings made of white stone and metal, with communication towers reaching toward the sky. It was the outpost. Ben stumbled forward, pulling the Queen's stretcher behind him. He was so dehydrated that he could no longer sweat, and his vision was fading in and out. But the buildings were real. They were actually there. When Ben reached the outpost's perimeter, alarms began sounding. Security guards came running out to meet them, shouting into their communication devices. Ben tried to tell them about the injured alien, but his voice came out as only a whisper. The last thing Ben remembered was the feeling of strong hands catching him as he fell. Medical teams rushed past him toward the Queen's stretcher, and he heard someone shouting orders about emergency surgery and life support. Ben had done it. Against all odds, he had carried the injured alien Queen 90 miles across the most dangerous desert in the sector. As unconsciousness took him, Ben felt a deep satisfaction. Whatever happened next, he had not given up. He had saved a life when everyone else would have said it was impossible. The human spirit had triumphed once again. Ben woke up 3 weeks later in the cleanest, whitest room he had ever seen. Soft lights glowed from the ceiling, and machines beeped quietly around his bed. His throat was dry but no longer burning, and his hands were wrapped in clean bandages. For the first time in days, he felt cool and comfortable. A human doctor entered the room carrying a medical tablet. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a neat style. "Good morning, Ben," she said with a warm smile. "I'm Dr. Mills. How are you feeling?" Ben tried to speak but could only make a rough whisper. The doctor quickly brought him a cup of water, which he drank gratefully. "The alien queen," Ben managed to say. "Is she alive?" Dr. Mills nodded. "She's fine, thanks to you. Queen Zara made a complete recovery. She's been asking about you every day since you arrived." "Queen Zara? That's her name. She's the ruler of something called the Veltar Empire. Ben, do you have any idea what you've done? You saved the life of one of the most powerful beings in this part of the galaxy." Ben shook his head weakly. "I just couldn't leave her to die." Dr. Mills sat down in the chair beside his bed. "Well, you might want to prepare yourself. Things have been very interesting around here since you arrived." "What do you mean?" "Look out the window." Ben turned his head toward the large window beside his bed. What he saw made his eyes widen in shock. The sky above the outpost was filled with enormous alien ships. They were beautiful vessels made of the same silver metal as Queen Zara's crashed ship, but these were intact and gleaming. There had to be at least 50 of them, each one larger than any human spacecraft Ben had ever seen. "They arrived 5 days ago," Dr. Mills explained. "Queen Zara called them here. The entire Veltar fleet is waiting for you to wake up." Ben felt dizzy again. "Why?" "She wants to speak with you. She's been very patient, but I think she's getting anxious. The alien commanders keep asking when you'll be well enough for an audience." Dr. Mills checked Ben's vital signs on her tablet. "Physically, you're much better. The dehydration nearly killed you, and you had severe heat exhaustion, but we've managed to repair most of the damage. You should be able to walk around in a day or two." "Can I see her?" "Queen Zara, I mean. If you feel strong enough. She's in the diplomatic quarters we set up for her." "But Ben, I should warn you about something. The aliens have been very polite, but they've essentially surrounded our outpost. No one can leave without their permission. I don't think they mean any harm, but they're clearly not going anywhere until they've spoken with you." The next morning, Ben felt strong enough to leave his medical bed. Dr. Mills helped him dress in clean clothes and walked with him through the outpost corridors. Ben noticed that everywhere they went, human staff members stared at him with wide eyes and whispered among themselves. "You're famous now," Dr. Mills said quietly. "Word has spread throughout human space about what you did. The news networks are calling you a hero." They reached a section of the outpost that had been completely transformed. Rich tapestries hung from the walls, and elegant alien furniture filled the hallways. Guards in elaborate armor stood at attention, their silver weapons gleaming under the lights. Ben had never seen aliens like these before. They were all tall and graceful, with the same pale blue skin as Queen Zara. Their faces were beautiful but stern, and they watched Ben with intense curiosity as he passed. At the end of the corridor, 2 massive doors opened to reveal a chamber that took Ben's breath away. The room was huge, with a domed ceiling covered in stars that seemed to move and twirl in patterns. Flowing curtains in shades of blue and silver hung from the walls, and the air smelled like the alien ship had, flowers mixed with clean metal. Queen Zara stood at the far end of the room, but she looked completely different from the injured person Ben had rescued. She wore flowing robes made of fabric that seemed to contain actual starlight, shifting and glowing as she moved. Her crown was larger now, made of silver metal and glowing crystals that cast dancing lights around the room. But most importantly, she looked healthy and strong. Her injuries had healed completely, and she stood tall and proud like the powerful ruler she truly was. When she saw Ben enter the room, her face lit up with a radiant smile. "Ben," she said, and her voice was like music. You have awakened at last. Ben was amazed that she could speak his language. Your Majesty, I'm glad to see you're feeling better. Queen Zara walked toward him with smooth, graceful steps. I owe you my life, brave human. Without your courage and determination, would have died in that desert. Anyone would have done the same thing. Queen Zara stopped walking and stared at Ben with her large silver eyes. No, Ben. That is where you are wrong. No one else would have done what you did. I have ruled the Veltar Empire for 40 years, and I have met thousands of different beings from hundreds of worlds. Never have I encountered someone with your strength of spirit. Ben felt embarrassed by the praise. I just couldn't leave you there. Exactly, Queen Zara said, beginning to pace around the room. You could not leave me there, even though I was a complete stranger. Even though saving me meant risking your own life. Even though carrying me 90 miles across burning desert should have been impossible for someone of your size. She gestured to the walls, where Ben now noticed there were images projected in the air. They showed scenes from their desert journey, Ben pulling the stretcher across endless sand, fighting off strange desert creatures, sharing his water with her even when he barely had enough for himself. My crown recorded everything, Ben. I remember every moment of our journey, even when I was unconscious. I watched you nearly die from thirst, but you still gave me water. I watched you collapse from exhaustion, but you still got up and kept walking. I watched you cover my body with yours when the sandstorm came, even though it meant you would be buried in the sand. Ben looked at the images with amazement. How is this possible? Veltar technology is very advanced. But that is not important now. What matters is what these images show about you. Queen Zara stopped pacing and faced Ben directly. They show a being of incredible honor, courage, and selflessness. They show someone who would rather die than abandon another living creature in need. I was just doing what felt right. And that, Queen Zara said with excitement in her voice, is exactly why I have made my decision. Before Ben could ask what she meant, the doors to the chamber opened again. A group of tall aliens entered, all wearing elaborate robes and carrying staffs of office. They arranged themselves in a semicircle around Ben and Queen Zara, their faces serious and formal. Ben of Earth, Queen Zara announced in a voice that carried to every corner of the room, I present to you the High Council of the Veltar Empire. They have traveled from our home system to witness what I am about to propose. Ben felt his heart racing. Propose? Queen Zara moved to an ornate throne that rose from the floor at her command. She sat down gracefully and looked at Ben with an expression that was both regal and warm. According to the ancient laws of our people, anyone who saves the life of Veltar royalty at great personal cost may claim any reward within our power to give. Our empire contains thousands of worlds, Ben. We have technology beyond your imagination, wealth that could buy entire star systems, knowledge that could advance your species by centuries. All of this could be yours if you ask for it. Ben shook his head. I don't want any reward, Your Majesty. I'm just happy you're alive. The alien council members exchanged glances and began whispering among themselves in their musical language. Queen Zara raised her hand for silence. I expected this answer, she said with a knowing smile. When I asked what you wanted most, you said you wanted to go home to your family. When offered unimaginable riches, you asked for nothing. This response tells me everything I need to know about your character. She stood up from her throne and walked down to where Ben was standing. The Veltar Empire is facing the greatest crisis in our history. We are a warrior people, Ben. For thousands of years, we have solved problems through strength and conquest. But now we face enemies who cannot be defeated by force alone. Queen Zara gestured to one of her council members, who activated a holographic display in the center of the room. Ben saw images of space battles, burning worlds, and millions of refugees fleeing from some terrible threat. The Krek swarm is consuming everything in their path, Queen Zara explained. They are a machine intelligence that converts living beings into more machines. They have already destroyed 12 civilizations, and they are moving toward Veltar space. Another council member spoke up in accented but clear human language. We have fought them 7 times, Majesty. We win every battle but lose every war. They learn from each encounter and return stronger. Queen Zara nodded grimly. Our military leaders think only of attack and defense. They cannot understand an enemy that grows stronger from defeat. We need new ways of thinking, new strategies, new leadership. She turned back to Ben with intense focus. You showed me something in that desert that I had never seen before. You showed me what it means to put someone else's welfare above your own survival. You showed me strength that comes not from weapons or armies, but from refusing to give up on what is right. Ben was starting to understand where this conversation was heading, and it made him nervous. Your Majesty, I'm just a salvage pilot. I don't know anything about running an empire or fighting wars. Exactly, Queen Zara said with growing excitement. You are not trained in our ways of thinking. You approach problems from a completely different perspective. When you saw my broken leg, you did not think about whether it was worth your time to help me. You simply helped. When the journey seemed impossible, you did not calculate odds of success. You simply began walking. She began pacing again, her robes flowing around her like liquid starlight. The Veltar Empire needs this kind of thinking, Ben. We need leaders who will try impossible things because they are right, not because they are easy. One of the council members stepped forward. Your Majesty, perhaps we should explain our proposal more clearly. Queen Zara nodded and returned to her throne. Ben of Earth, I am offering you marriage. Ben felt like the floor had disappeared beneath his feet. Marriage? Not just marriage, Queen Zara continued. I am offering you the position of Emperor Consort of the Veltar Empire. You would rule beside me as an equal partner, helping to guide our people through this crisis and into a new age. The room fell completely silent. Ben could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. I don't understand, he said weakly. We barely know each other. We can't even speak the same language without translation. Language can be learned, Queen Zara replied. Cultural differences can be bridged. But character cannot be taught. Honor cannot be purchased. The willingness to sacrifice yourself for others cannot be created by training or education. She leaned forward on her throne. Ben, you carried me 90 miles through killing heat when any reasonable person would have given up after the first day. You shared your water with me when you had barely enough for yourself. You protected me from sandstorms and predators without thinking of your own safety. These actions tell me who you are at the deepest level. Another council member spoke up. The prophecies speak of a leader who will come from the stars to unite different peoples against the darkness. Someone whose strength comes not from his sword but from his spirit. Ben looked around the room at all the watching faces. This is crazy. I'm nobody special. I'm just a human who happened to be in the right place at the right time. No, Queen Zara said firmly. You are a human who chose to do the right thing when it was impossibly difficult. That makes you the most special person I have ever met. She stood up and walked over to a wall display that showed images of the Veltar Empire, beautiful worlds filled with crystalline cities, vast fleets of silver ships, and billions of alien people living in peace and prosperity. Our empire is strong, Ben, but strength alone will not save us from what is coming. We need wisdom. We need compassion. We need the ability to see solutions that others miss. She turned back to face him. We need you. Ben's mind was spinning. What about my family? My friends? My whole life is in human space. Your family would be honored guests in our empire forever. They could visit whenever they wished, or they could come to live with us if they chose. As for your friends, imagine the good you could do for your entire species by creating an alliance between humans and Veltar. Queen Zara walked back to Ben and took his hands in hers. Her skin was warm despite its unusual color, and her touch was gentle but strong. I am not asking you to give up who you are, Ben. I am asking you to become who you were meant to be. In that desert, you showed me what human courage looks like. Now I want you to show the galaxy. Ben looked into her silver eyes and saw something there that made his heart skip. It was not just gratitude or political calculation. It was genuine affection, respect, and something that might even be love. The council has already approved this proposal, Queen Zara continued. They agree that an alliance with humanity, sealed by royal marriage, would benefit both our peoples. But the choice is yours, Ben. I will not command your heart, only ask for it. What happens if I say no? Then you return home with our eternal gratitude and friendship. The Veltar Empire will always be an ally to humanity. You will be remembered as the human who saved their queen, and that will be honor enough for any lifetime. And if I say yes? Queen Zara smiled, and the expression transformed her face completely. Then we face the future together, Ben. We learn each other's ways. We combine human ingenuity with Veltar strength. We find new ways to solve old problems. And perhaps, if we are very lucky, we discover that love can bridge any distance between different worlds. Ben stood in the magnificent chamber, surrounded by alien technology and foreign customs, knowing that his next words would change the course of his life forever. The scared part of him wanted to run home to his simple, safe existence as a salvage pilot. But the part that had carried an injured stranger 90 miles through burning desert was telling him something different. Maybe Queen Zara was right. Maybe he was meant for something greater than he had ever imagined. Maybe the same stubborn courage that had saved her life could help save an entire civilization. The human and the alien queen looked at each other across the space between worlds, waiting for an answer that would determine the fate of two species and the future of the galaxy itself.